Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into one of the most fascinating narratives of dramatic irony in ancient literature. We're looking at chapters 3 and 4 of the book of Jonah. Seriously, it's a wild story. We're going to examine a prophet who is just wildly successful at his job, yet absolutely hates his own success. It's a profoundly deep look at the clash between human stubbornness and the boundless grace of the divine. Okay, let's dive into this.
So here's our roadmap for The Explainer. We'll start with the second call. Then we'll see how the great city responds, before unpacking a prophet's misplaced anger. After that, we'll look at the lesson of the plant, and finally wrap up with valuing people over plants.
All right, part 1, the second call. This is all about Jonah getting a second chance.
Right, so remember his famous initial rebellion, where he literally hops on a boat going the exact opposite direction and ends up in the belly of a great fish? Well, after all that, God gives Jonah a second chance. The word of the Lord comes to him a second time. And God doesn't negotiate here. He gives a very specific geographic and vocal command: arise, go to Nineveh, and preach. But what does preach actually mean in this context? It means to publish, to pronounce, to announce, and to proclaim. So the crucial point is that Jonah isn't supposed to add his own opinions or, subtract the parts he just doesn't like. He is to proclaim exactly what God bids him to say. God equips him with the exact proclamation to deliver.
Now, let's put this into perspective, because the scale of where Jonah is heading is just massive. Think about this number, 60. Nineveh wasn't just some little village. It was the capital of the ancient Assyrian Empire. According to the source material, Nineveh and its surrounding suburbs had a staggering circumference of 60 miles. I mean, we're talking about a massive fortress here. Its walls were reportedly 100 feet high and actually wide enough to ride 3 chariots side by side right on top of them. It was this sprawling metropolis that would take a literal 3-day journey just to walk all the way across.
Moving right along to part 2, the great city responds.
So Jonah arrives at this imposing, wicked city, which, by the way, is the very empire threatening his own people. And he travels a full day's journey, maybe 20 miles or so, right into its heart, and he finally delivers his pointed message of judgment. And here it is. This is his entire proclamation. Jonah cries out, "Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown." That's it. It's short, it's sharp, and it is terrifying. The term overthrown meant completely thrown down, leveled, utterly destroyed. He sets this dramatic 40-day ticking clock. No long sermons, just a profound, unavoidable warning of impending doom. And the result of that one sentence? It's honestly astounding. It triggers an immediate chain reaction of repentance. First, the people of Nineveh believed God. They completely trusted the message. Second, they proclaimed a fast. And third, they put on sackcloth. And listen, this wasn't just a few peasants doing this. This went all the way from the greatest king on his throne down to the least citizen in the streets. Even the animals were forced to participate. Fasting and wearing rough sackcloth physically demonstrated their deep mourning and just a massive spiritual shift. It is literally one of the greatest revivals recorded in text.
Which brings us to part 3, a prophet's misplaced anger.
You'd really think Jonah would be thrilled here. His mission was a total success. The city repented, and because of that repentance, God extends his mercy and spares the city from the 40-day destruction. But instead of celebrating, the narrative takes a really sharp, ironic pivot. Jonah becomes intensely furious. He is so upset by God's grace that he literally marches right out of the city, builds himself a little booth or shelter, sits down, and just waits. He sits there hoping that maybe, just maybe, God will change his mind and still rain down fire and brimstone. Let me break the fourth wall for a second and ask you directly. Have you ever wanted God to strike someone down, but he saved them instead? Because that is exactly what Jonah is experiencing right now. He wanted justice for his enemies, but God gave them mercy. And that leads us perfectly into part 4, the lesson of the plant.
Now, God doesn't strike Jonah for his insolence. Instead, he uses nature to teach a profoundly personal lesson. And this brilliantly illustrates his sovereignty over not just massive historical events, but the tiny, everyday details of a single person's life to prove a point. Look at the precise orchestration of this timeline. Day 1, Jonah is sitting out there in the scorching heat, grieving the fact that Nineveh wasn't destroyed, and God mercifully prepares a plant, a gourd, to grow rapidly and provide a cooling shade over Jonah's head. And Jonah is exceedingly glad. But then the very next morning, God prepares a worm to strike the plant, causing it to wither and die instantly. Then at sunrise, God prepares a vehement, scorching east wind. The plant is gone, the heat is unbearable, and Jonah's misplaced priorities are completely exposed.
Deprived of his personal comfort, Jonah reaches absolute peak petty rage.
The guy faints from the oppressive heat and literally begs to die. He actually says, "It is better for me to die than to live." I mean, he is throwing a full-blown tantrum. He is entirely unbothered by the thought of thousands of people dying in a city, but he completely loses his will to live over the death of a shade plant.
This brings us to our final section, Part 5, Valuing People Over Plants.
We are now at the absolute climax of the explainer, where God holds a mirror up to his angry prophet. Now, what's really interesting about this comparison is the stark, almost absurd contrast. God says to Jonah, "Look at your pity. You are crying over a temporary gourd, a plant you didn't labor for, you didn't create, you didn't even make grow. It came up in a night and vanished in a night. Yet you're angry that I have pity on Nineveh?" God's pity is focused on 120,000 human beings living in such spiritual darkness they cannot discern their right hand from their left, not to mention all their innocent cattle. God is showing Jonah the sheer scale of his selfish, narrow viewpoint.
And the text ends right here, completely abruptly, with God asking this piercing question, "Dost thou well to be angry?" God just leaves the question hanging in the air for Jonah. And really, for all of us. It challenges us to examine our own hearts. Do we value our own comfort, our own tribalism, and our own desire for judgment over the expansive, saving mercy of God? It's a provocative thought that forces us to question if we truly value what God values. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive leaves you with a whole lot to think about.